flame to burn. One race that I can say I ran.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 21047.com podcast. My name is Keith Cartwright. I am the host of this show, and I am really glad to have you along, listening in today, wherever it is that you're listening, and whenever it is that you might be listening in. Today's episode is sponsored by my good friend Kimberly Yenzer. Kimberly was one of the very first supporters of this show and of this 21047.com mission. And so I'm really grateful. She supports me through Patreon. Patreon is a platform where folks like Kimberly can go and support creatives like me who are just trying to put something out there, whether it be writing, whether it be music, or in this case, a podcast that I hope will run some light to the dark that folks often experience in the world. And for me, it's light that I've found in this running journey and in the stories of friends that I have met along the way, many of them who get featured and interviewed on this show. So thank you, Kimberly. You can go to my website, 21047.com, TWOTIM47.com. Click on the Support Me tab, and then there you can learn more about Patreon, get linked to the Patreon site, and then there you can learn more about what Patreon is all about, how you can support this effort on a monthly basis financially, and then get some cool perks in return for doing it. So again, thank you, Kimberly. So today I am interviewing, although flip that around, I have interviewed Jenny Baker before, but today she is interviewing me, and we had a great and delightful conversation. So it was pretty long, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly turn this over to that conversation between Jenny Baker and I. I am headed down to her race, the Georgia Jewel, the 35-mile version of it. Will be my longest race ever, my first ultra ever, and all of it is because of who Jenny is, because of our early conversations. And as you listen to this one, I think you'll come to understand that a little bit more if you haven't heard her before and already understand that. So anyhow, here is my conversation with Jenny Baker. I want to welcome Jenny Baker. She's kind of become a familiar voice on this podcast, but today that voice is going to take on a little different role because Jenny's going to do some of the question asking today, and I'm going to answer, and so I'm in a little bit of a fearful spot here this morning because everybody who's listened to Jenny knows Jenny will say anything, ask anything, which is what we appreciate about her, unless you're sitting on the receiving end of her questions. But anyhow, it'll be fun, and so I'm going to hand it over to you then, Miss Baker.
All right. So I've been thinking about a good kind of like softball warm-up question for you, and I landed on a good one last night, and I think I'm going to go with it. I want to hear your worst running poop story that you've ever had.
My worst.
That's what I want to hear first.
My worst running poop story. Well,
what's happened to you? It can't be secondhand. It has to have happened to you.
You know, well, I guess I don't really have one, but I will say this to that. I probably have no greater running fear than having a poop story. So to that end, I mean, I do a lot of things to make sure that never becomes an issue, and probably some of them aren't running healthy things. Like I try not, and it's funny. I remember you saying, I think it was before the Little Rock Marathon when you and I talked, you told me do not eat anything fiber the day before. And I thought she's really feeding into this fear I have because I just, and it's all related to going to the bathroom and these sort of in unconventional places. Like I have never gone to the bathroom in an airplane because I'm just not up for pooping in an airplane. And so I don't want to do that out on a race. So I take a lot of precautions and to make sure. I never have a real good answer to your question there. Now, I was out.
Okay, well, wait. Well, tell us about your precautions. What precautions, besides like the fiber thing, what precautions do you take? This is the stuff people want to know. They want to know, how do I not poop all the time when I'm running?
Right. So, one, I curtail how much I eat the day before. So carb loading for me probably gets tailored down a little bit. I wake up, so I've got a fairly regular routine. So when I wake up in the morning,
well, that's good.
Pooping regular is one of the first things that I get out of the way for the day. So when it comes to running, mainly when it's racing, when it's, if I'm just out running 4 or 5 miles, it's never really been an issue. But so if there's a longer race like the Jewel, I will be up extra early to try to speed the schedule up a little bit. So my body usually cooperates. Like if I wake up at 3 in the morning instead of 5 after I have that first cup of coffee, which usually triggers the morning pooping, that will get it out of the way early. So lighter eating, moving the schedule up a little bit in the morning. So far, that has been successful. Now, I will tell you, I was out, and this has only been 6 weeks or so ago. I was out doing a run here in town, and my goal was to run a half marathon. And I was about 10 miles into it, and I was feeling great. And then all of a sudden, I did feel like, oh my God, I've got to poop. I stopped my watch. I started walking. I started everything I could to keep and fight to keep it all in. And it literally ruined this whole, like I was in the neighborhood. I could have knocked on somebody's door, I guess, and pardon me, can I use your bathroom? But I just was not going to do it. So it was like a 3-mile walk home. Fighting this the whole way to avoid having a story for Jenny Baker when she said, tell us your best pooping story.
That's a pretty good one. I think a lot of people have probably been in that situation before. The good thing about running roads is you can do that. I've knocked on somebody's door before, but when you're on the trails, then it becomes a whole nother ballgame because there are no doors to knock on. So I have found that finding a tree that's fallen over to use kind of as some leverage like a toilet bowl, that works well for me.
Well, I will tell you that I have a lot of experience in this area because I don't know if I've talked with you about this before, but I worked for 13 years in wilderness programming for at-risk kids. So it was residential. And one of the things we did with those kids was we would go out for 3-week canoe trips. And we'd put on a river with all of our provisions and set off for 3 weeks and not see anybody until 3 weeks later. So when you're out on a river, obviously, there are no indoor plumbing. Right. There's no real conventional toilet. So you learn to get really, really creative. And, it kind of starts with you just dig a hole, but then it's like, well, I want to build something where I can get comfortable, read my morning magazine. So, you start building things with fallen trees and it's funny, you start walking through the woods with these kids after you've been out there a week or so, and they'll see a big tree. Oh, Chief, there's a great toilet right there. So it takes on a whole new perspective. And the fact that we are weaving this into a running conversation is amazing.
Hey, poop is very much a part of running. I think those boys would do well as ultra runners.
Yes, they absolutely would. But I will tell you, this isn't way out of whack because one of the concerns I've had about thinking and preparing for this 35-mile Georgia Jewel is, holy cow, I'm going to be out there a lot longer. And the risk is much, much greater that, certain bodily functions are going to come up on me when I'm out there. So what on earth?
Right. Hey, that'll make a good podcast. Okay, so take me back to when you were a kid and you were growing up. What was we talked a little bit ago about you kind of growing up with your grandpa on a farm and, beating him up in the mornings and hard work. But what was running when you were a kid? If I had have asked the 10, 12, 14-year-old Keith, like, hey, what do you think about people who run for fun? Like, what would he have said?
Oh, my goodness. Well, running means something very, very different right now. So I'll tell you a little bit older than 12, 13. I was probably a sophomore in high school, I think. So I played football. I was a running back. And we had got a new high school football coach, and his name was John Rockney. He was the grandson of Newt Rockney, the famous Notre Dame college football coach. And so he came into, and we were a little farm school there in Ohio. And so he had come and bringing that Rockney name, and he was going to make a big impression on all of us, football players there. He was going to make a statement, and that statement was, it was the very first practice he had with us. And again, this is a farm school, so we all showed up to practice one day, and in the parking lot there was this parade of old farm trucks, pickup trucks. And so he ordered all of us get in the back of those trucks, and we did. And so he hauled us, 10, 12 miles out into the country to this little town of Resaca, and said, all right, boys, pile out and run home. And
oh, wow.
I remember being so mad. I mean, I was sort of a rebellious spirit at that time. So, and I was a decent football player. I was going to be a starting running back. So in my mind, I'm like, what is he thinking? The furthest I will ever have to run is 100 yards. And I'll throw in a little backstory to that. I did run track in high school, and so I was a sprinter. And so that was running in my mind. Short distances, I was pretty fast at short distances. But you're out of your mind if you're making me run anything over than one lap around the track. And so I walked most of that 12 miles home. And he would, be driving back and forth, getting on us. Pick it up, Cartwright, pick it up. And in my mind, I'm like, he is not making me run all that way. I will not run all that way. And so I forget what time he had in mind for the running backs and the linemen. They had to finish this thing in so much time. Or he was going to make them run a mile every day after practice. And he pulled me into his office after, I don't know how many hours it took me to do a little walk run all the way back to the school. But he pulled me in his office afterwards and got on me about my work ethic, got on about the example that I was setting for other people. And I made a comment that, I have no idea why you're even making us do that because, again, I'll never have to run that far. And so he gave me a lot of lesson on discipline, about mentality. Some of these things aren't about just getting prepared to run this 100 yards. It's a lot more about this mentality of we're in it for the long haul. And so I will tell you, for the next several weeks, I ran a mile after practice every day. And I've written about this actually before. I think that really set in me this disdain for long distance running that just carried with me until just a few years ago when I picked up longer distance running again. So
what did that teach you in that moment? I mean, coupled with, the farm and other things that you were seeing as a kid, what did that teach you about your ability to do hard things?
Well, I don't know that I saw it as much then, but when I look back at guys like that, and my grandfather, who I was telling you about, was a farmer, and that coach ended up having a huge impact on my life. When I look back on that and kind of weave the common denominator in all of these big leaders in my life, it always sort of comes down to this idea of being willing to put in the hard work, of being willing to draw within to find what it takes. You always hear a lot of these guys talk about, whether it's pro athletes or folks who've done great things, who reflect back on people who've influenced them. They always talk about these people being able to draw something out of them that they didn't know was there. And, I think certainly today that's what running has done. But looking back on it, And as a young kid, I don't think, at least for me, I wasn't wise enough to see what was happening in that. But now I look back and know they were using, whether it be hard work on the farm or whether it be, no, this isn't going to be a normal preseason run. We're driving 12 miles out. All of that was to help us all sort of explore and discover these things in us that you're never going to know you have unless you face some sort of obstacle or you're pushed to physically to some place where you've never been. I think as humans, we all sort of rise to our own level of comfort, and that will never be, I don't think, where other people, it will never be to this place other people see this capability in us. I just don't think we, unless you're superhuman, I don't think we ever, any of us ever get to this place of our full potential without somebody out there making us do crazy things like run 12 miles back to the school.
Sure. So when you're running now and you hit a wall, what do you dig back to get over that wall? Like, what's your kind of your go-to anchors?
Well, my faith is huge. You know, you and I have talked about this a lot, and you know, the whole, my faith relies on this idea that until we're really completely empty, we never completely feel the strength that God can pull into my life, our lives. So that's been first and foremost. I've said over and over, when anybody asks, what is with you in this running journey? First answer always is this has drawn me closer to God than I've ever been. And it's all on that sort of principle that in those moments when I hit that wall and I've got nothing left, I always hear God saying, good, this is exactly where I want you, because now you can quit being foolish, thinking that you can rely on you for strength, and you're going to have to lean on me. And then the more you do this.
So what do you say to him? So what in those moments?
You've got me where you want me. You've got me.
Okay.
You've got
so
me. Go ahead.
So over and over, you say that, you just say, okay.
No, I mean, when I ran my first marathon in Richmond, which I've only run two, so I always say I ran my first one like it was the first of 1,000. It was the first of two. But I always say I hit, mile 20, and I was listening to the Big Daddy Weave song, Lion and the Lamb. And in that moment, the chorus came on that said, who can stop the Lord Almighty? And it actually repeats. It just, who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? And, for the next 6 miles, no matter what song came on, I just kept hearing that. And ultimately, that's what led me to be talking to you today, doing this podcast. When I crossed the finish line of that, first marathon, and the whole buildup when you're running your first marathon is this me thing. I'm crossing this off my checklist, my bucket list. I'm going to be able to say I'm a marathoner. I'm in the 1%. It really is all about this personal, and I don't fault anybody who has that mindset. I had it. I think it is a great personal accomplishment. But for me, it was a little surprising that when I crossed the finish line, my whole emphasis, and I heard God through whispers, I had the verse 2 Timothy on my back when I was running it. So I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I've kept the faith. That resonated with me. It kept speaking to me much louder than, I guess when I crossed the finish line, I didn't feel as personally fulfilled as I felt like God had led me through something he wanted me to do. And I don't think it was, and I still don't, I don't think it was because he wanted me to feel personally accomplished. I think he had things that he was pretty intent on accomplishing through me. And so, so I look back on that moment when I hit the wall. And then the more you hit that wall, I mean, God's there. He's going to give you the strength, but you have to build up some strength to be prepared for that moment. And, so I've hit walls enough in training now. I've hit walls enough in some races to know that if I you have to have this confidence that if I take that next step and I keep taking that next step, and the confidence that I'm capable of it, you do it enough, you realize, no, I've felt this and I've heard this voice before trying to talk me out of it. Because the other piece is, I absolutely, I believe very strongly in God, but I also believe very strongly that there's an alternate force out there. The devil knows exactly what God is trying to accomplish through my running journey, and he wants nothing more. And he'll want nothing more because, again, I've made it very clear about coming to that Georgia Jewel. It's very symbolic. It's further than I've ever run. The mountains are bigger, right? And so God is going to have to be the mountain mover. I've put it on my Facebook page. I'm not the mountain mover, but you are. It's in this song that I happen to love. And so that's the whole deal. I know I'm not getting that done unless God moves that mountain. But there's this devil over here who absolutely is, it's a contest with him. He absolutely does not want that to happen.
So what would you say to someone who says, Keith, that's great, but does God really care about my running? I mean, with all the things going on in the world and all the pain and the sickness and the war, does God really care about my running?
I would say no, but quickly say God really does care about our hearts. Where are our hearts pointed? And so, yes, I think if I was out running every day and for the sake of, I've got a running streak going, or I've pointed for this race like I kind of had, I want to accomplish this first marathon so I can hang this medal up there. I think God is really invested in us experiencing joy, experiencing success, but I think he can pretty quickly overlook that when it's not tied to these hearts that are for reaching other people with his story, impacting other people with his love. Nothing gives me greater joy about looking ahead to the Georgia Jewel than, we've recruited 2 or 3 other friends who are coming down to run it with us. But they made that decision solely on listening to the podcast you and I did and hearing your heart for God and hearing this spirit about you, which absolutely flows from God. To me, that is what this is all about. So we're going to go run and do it. Run. I believe God has equipped us all with very unique tools and very unique gifts to be his body, to be his voice. And through listening to him, I've just discovered running is one of my tools to do that. And and I will tell you, when I feel it every time, when running starts to become about me, right? When I'm saying, look what I did, and I post that on Facebook, and I'm wanting, and I'll admit, I get there. Look at me.
Yeah, we all do.
Look what I did. Look at this. I run further than I ever have, or I did a PR. I did this streak, and it's all, I start to lose fulfillment in doing this whole running thing. But when I get myself, and God's usually pretty quick to remind me that, like with most things, this is not about you, right? This is about me. This is about this story that you're obligated to get out there. And you've kind of made this story about you, so I'm going to reel you back in here. And to that degree, I think God absolutely is invested in my running. He has interest in my running.
Yeah, I think there's this book called From Slavery to Sonship. It probably has been one of the most impactful, besides just the Bible, impactful books in my life. And the author talks about how there are these counterfeit affections that we run after, and they become these false idols. And so these counterfeit affections play the role that God intends to play in our lives, where they give us value and our worth and you know, our fulfillment. And I think you hit on something that's really big for all of us to remember, that none of us are above chasing counterfeit affections. That's just our brokenness. And in anything that we're finding passion and purpose in, the enemy does. He doesn't just want to come distract us. Like the Bible says, he wants to come kill, steal, and destroy. And so there is very much an enemy out there who is looking to destroy us. And he does that through these counterfeit affections and other things. But, you know, I love that you admitted, like, there is this tendency. And so keeping ourselves in check, and it's not the running. I mean, God uses a multitude of things that people are passionate about. I mean, it could be, I listened to a couple, you know, podcasts, and these guys are talking about politics. And I'm like, man, God, like, this is crazy. Why are these guys wasting their time? And the Lord gently reminds me, like, if I've called them to that, it is not a waste of time.
Right.
I create people differently with different passions, and then I leverage those for my purpose. And so it is, running is kind of the secondary goal.
Right.
Whereas, you know, our primary goal is our relationship with the Lord, and then, you know, knowing God and making God known to others. And I think, and talk about this a little bit, failure. I mean, let's say you go to you come down to the Georgia Jewel, and you don't have a race like you anticipated. How does running being a secondary goal influence how you handle races when they don't go your way?
Well, unfortunately, well, it's not unfortunately, it's fortunately, really, when I step back and look at it. And I've shared some of this story. I went down to Houston in January to run my second marathon. And that all sprung from, back in September, was just out running in town here, and I really didn't have a big running goal on the horizon. And God just kind of whispered into my heart at that time. It was after the Hurricane Harvey had hit down in the Southwest, and Texas had been devastated. All these pictures of the devastation and suffering were all over the news, and for whatever reason, that just impacted my heart. I think God put it on my heart. And so I decided I was going to run the Hokie Half Marathon over here in Virginia, near Virginia Tech. And I was going to do it and try to raise some money for the Hurricane Harvey victims down in Texas. And, you know, my mind, I just want to raise a couple $100 and find a good cause down there. And so, a very long story short, just, God weaved this story together. I ended up raising a couple of $1,000 and, wore this bib on my back of the state of Texas and put the names of all these people who had contributed. And through a friend, I met Father Jim down at St. Andrew's Church in Pearland, Texas. We connected, actually did a podcast interview, and just found out they were doing some incredible things in that community down there. They had been doing it for years. In his words, he said, Keith, our community has always been the walls of our church. The church walls are not the walls of our church. It's our community. He said, we feel like God.
That's cool.
He said, we feel like God has been preparing us for 20 years for this Hurricane Harvey relief. We aren't just a church who's, look what's happened. We have to now respond. He said, we've been, being disciplined about preparing and responding all along. And so God just weaved this wonderful partnership. And so after talking to them, several things fell into place that made it a good idea for me to go down to Texas in January and meet these folks from St. Andrew's Church and go down there and run my second marathon, the Houston Marathon. And then so many, I had, Tracy Outlaw, our mutual friend, several of my other friends said, hey, we're going to be a part of this too. We're going down to Texas in January and do this thing with you. Now, where the running challenge came in is that, so my first marathon in Richmond, it was a 7-hour time limit, and it took me all but 2 minutes of that time limit. I think I finished in 6:58. Well, the Houston Marathon cutoff time was 6 hours, which was the main reason I said I originally went to the Houston Marathon website and wanted to sign up for the half marathon. That was my comfort level.
Right.
It was sold out. And I said, well, I'll just have to find another race. And a friend of mine said, well, the marathon's available. And I said, yeah, it's got a 6-hour time limit. I don't think I can do that. And her response was, well, what do you think the challenges are facing these hurricane victims? What do you think the odds they think they're facing? It's like, oh my goodness, why did you say that?
Right.
So I signed up for the marathon, but I had this challenge on me that I was going to have to run it, an hour faster than, my previous marathon, which was a year or better prior. I had run a lot more. I felt like it was really possible, but I was going to have to train hard for it. So we all went down to Houston. We went down there a couple of days ahead of time. We got to go tour and help out in one of the homes where somebody had lost everything. Here was this mom in there, single mom with her 5 kids, and she refused to leave her home because it was the only home they had. So the church was kind of working around her family to restore this to livable conditions. Me and my friends got to go to an elementary school there and be a part of a career day type deal. So we all got to go in and love and share on these elementary school kids with, just some affection, and then also trying to, inspire them with the different careers that we had. So we got to do a lot of stuff ahead of time. Well, then came race day. It was a Sunday. The weather was perfect for me. The colder, the better when it comes to running for me. So I really felt,
better get ready for the duel.
Oh, trust me. Every day when I'm out here now this summer running in this heat, and I keep thinking of you talking about 90s and humid the last 2 races. But the race really started out good for me at the half marathon. I think I had to keep somewhere about a 13.5-minute per mile pace, which was, for me, pretty good. And a half marathon through it, I was on pace. I was doing really well. And then it just something, I guess it all just caught up with me. A lot of the work we had done in the days ahead, I was on my feet a lot. I was already pushing myself, and it all started to kind of fall apart after mile 14, 15. I could look back and see, Houston Marathon's huge, so they have like a row of police cars at the end of the line, the whole, and I think it was about mile 16 when the end of the line caught up with me, and they said, hey, you all right? You're going to have to keep up. If you're not, here by then, we're going to have to ask you to exit the course. And I think I hung in there till about mile 18, and then I texted my wife, and, I said, I'm not going to make it. I'm just not going to be able to pull this thing off. And, I felt so dejected in that moment because it had been so much buildup. I'm going to Houston.
Right.
All my friends are gone. They're all at the finish line waiting on me to finish this thing. And now I'm going to be on this bus getting carried back to the finish line. I'm going to walk up to them from outside the course, not over the finish line. And, I was sitting on the bus, and there was I wasn't the only one. There were about 20 of us sitting on this big charter bus, and you start looking around at the different faces, and they're all kind of feeling some flavor of what you're feeling, disappointed, failure, I couldn't do it. Some of them probably had never run a marathon, so they're sitting there. I tried this thing, and instead of crossing off a bucket list, I have to live with this reality I couldn't do it. And all those things are going through my mind. But as that bus started to take off, whether it was a voice, whether it was a whisper, I heard God say, you already accomplished what I sent you to come here to do. Yeah. The running thing was your deal. Everything else was my deal. Whether you finish this race or not, And it kind of goes back to your earlier question. God was saying, I didn't really have much interest in that. I was going to be happy for you. I'd been at the finish line cheering if you made it, But really, you, before the race ever started, you accomplished what I sent you to come here to do. The church we partnered with, they put on a church service for us the night before and did a little dinner. I mean, there was only 12 of us, I think, but they pulled everybody together, put this service on, had scriptures. They had 26.2 scriptures that they had poured out for us. God led them to weave their lives in with ours. And I'm still in touch with them and hoping to go down next year and do some things with them. But Jenny, the other thing about this running community and surrounding yourself with the right people. So I did. I got on that bus, and you can hear God, right? You can hear God giving you this message. It doesn't mean like in an instant you're suddenly, okay, cool, God, I get it now. You're still, you got to go back and face this human reality. You got to go back and face friends who came down to support you, came to run this marathon with you. You got to go look in their eyes and know. And, in the back of your mind, these are all supportive people. There's nobody going to call you a loser when you walk up. But you still have this human, right? This value I place in myself based on my own accomplishments. We all can go there. But, I walked up, and every one of my friends came up and basically almost word for word repeated what God said to me on that bus. All of them said, in one way or another, you already accomplished everything you came here to set out to do. None of them went down this road of running. Hey, just a bad day. Sometimes that just happens. Shake it off. There's another one. All of them, one way or another said, you finished this thing. You did what you were supposed to come. And, I think that's important. You have to have the right people in your life. I think so many times we build our lives based on putting people in our lives that will always make us feel good. We want people around us that are, kind of always these cheerleaders for us. And that's not what these friends were. These were friends who understood and shared this faith that I have. They understood that this wasn't I got to make you feel better. This was this mission we're all in together. It got accomplished here. And so, but
it goes back to,
I do want to say one thing to that, because there is this other side to it that we never shake. There is this human side. And I did come back in response to the physical piece, to the running piece, with this commitment that is not happening to me again. I think we all have this. It's a competitive drive. And every month since, that was just this past January, 2018, every month since then, I've run a new mileage high every month. February, March, April, May, every month has been higher mileage. And it all goes back to that piece because I think we all get to make a choice. Am I going to try to do something different physically, or am I just going to accept that? So I don't want anybody to ever believe that because you believe in this faith, you cling to this faith, that you suddenly become okay with personal failure. That is not how that works. And I think God puts that sort of spirit in me and in us. But it's not for me to be personally successful. It's because that drive to respond to failure in running is very much correlated to, I say it all the time, this Christian faith that we have, where I think a lot of us share it in a misleading way and a lot of us adopt it in a misleading way, is sometimes presented that if you adopt this faith, you have the good life. That's never what it's about. You can't read the Bible and walk away thinking that this is about living this good earthly life. This Christian faith is about facing the reality that life is hard. Life is going to kick you and stomp you, that there's this enemy out there who's very intent on being a part of that. And this relationship is about being able to have a strength, to be able to have a source of hope and life that allows you to face those things. And so I think when you can make that parallel with the running failure and the obstacles there and bring it over here as a way to strengthen this relationship, like I have said, with God, then that's why he loves this competitive spirit in us. That's why he loves this. That Houston race is not getting me down. In fact, I'm already signed up. I'm going back next year, and I will conquer that thing. But it won't be for me,
Right. Well, that's I've been at many finish lines where the bus pulls up and just devastated runners come out. And I mean, I've seen friends who for weeks would not talk about their race. And I'm thankful that we serve a God who gives more purpose to our running than just, crossing a proverbial finish line. We serve a creator who calls us to deeper purpose so that when it doesn't go according to our plans, there's still purpose to it. There is still glory to it. And then we can, and that carries over for me into my everyday life. I mean, there are things that I've tried the past 3 years in starting some new things and doing some new things where there have been rough spots. And my dad used to tell me that, well, he still will say this, that failure isn't truly failure if you learn and you move forward. And so you're just reinvesting what you've learned in a future success. And so with God, we're able to embrace a different story than what we write and not be devastated by it. And I was thinking when you were talking, you talked about when you run, you love it because you're surrendering, you're opening up. It reminded me of Abraham and Isaac when God called Abraham, and this is a really tough Bible story for a lot of people. When God called Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, and in the end, obviously, the Lord was good and provided a substitute, as he did with Jesus, thousands of years later. But sometimes the Lord goes after those things that are most precious and dear to us, and sometimes that can be finding worth in counterfeit affections. And he goes after those things because he is not concerned with our performance and success on this earth. He's concerned with our heart, and he doesn't want anything between us and him. He wants a full relationship so that he can give himself to us in the most powerful way that he can. So I love that you can embrace a different story and still find purpose in it, because I think a lot of runners could stand to hear that.
Yeah, and fortunately, well, it's unfortunately, fortunately, and I tell this story quite a bit that, if God ever gave me the chance to say, okay, Keith, here's your lucky day, you're 54 years old, you're on your 6th decade of life, today, for the sake of whatever haunting memories, for whatever reason, today I'm going to give you an eraser and I'm going to let you wipe out 1 decade of your life. Just you can make that thing disappear like it never happened. And without hesitation, I would say, oh my God, give me that eraser, that decade of my 20s. I just lived in darkness. I abused alcohol. it was a really ugly period in my life. And I would no longer have that erased when God would say, isn't that funny, Keith? Because that is the decade I am using right now more powerfully to shape who you are, what you do. My whole work life now is around substance abuse prevention, which anybody who knew me in my 20s would say, well, there's a real irony in that. And my whole life is about, because I lived in such a really dark place, I have this real soft spot for people who are hurricane victims, who are living in poverty, I would never have had this level of empathy for people and be open to because I look at somebody and think that should not be darkness in their life. They're kind of overblowing this thing. I do not have that mentality. I just know there are a lot of people out there living in darkness, because there were a lot of people who said, Keith, you're kind of just being irresponsible. You're making stupid decisions. And all of that is true. But it doesn't erase this fact that I was living in a place where I was keeping God out of my life. I was keeping him at a distance. It was really making for a lot of darkness. Because I had all that, God has used all that to open up doors and has given me this tool of running to do some incredible things. But none of it is built on, well, I shouldn't say none of it, but when I look, it's not a college education, right? It's not all of the things that went well in my life that he's using. He literally is. He's saying, this is a really dark and ugly place in your life, Keith. I think I'm really going to use this. You know, I'm going to set all this other stuff that went really well, where you felt good, and you know, you had this great upbringing, you're hanging out with your grandpa on the farm. That's all cool stuff. But I really love all this failure, all this where you fell short, all this where you didn't meet expectations. And I'm going to, because you know what happens with that? There's only, if I look at my life now, there's no way on earth Keith Cartwright could have weaved a story out of that ugliness. There's no way. There's nothing. And I love writing. I love writing stories. I love being in control of my life. I do not have what it takes to write the story that he has written using all of that. And same with that, you know, same with the, you know, when looking back at the failure in a marathon, it's frequently, and I have no doubt, Georgia Jewel will be in response to that Houston failure. If I hadn't failed there, I never would have been thinking bigger, dreaming bigger, thinking redemption, because that's a lot of what Georgia, I'm not just going to go back and run. I'm going to show you I can do something bigger than that crazy marathon. But God, he'll be behind the whole authorship of all that.
Well, so let's talk to the people who are runners, and they're finding a passion for running. And so they're wanting to bring purpose to their running for God, but they may not want to start a podcast, or they're not a good writer, and so, you know, they're not going to write awesome blogs. What are some other practical ways that our friends can bring some purpose to their running? Have you thought about that, or have any good suggestions on that?
Well, you know, first and foremost, in the running community, I mean, there are so many people out there running, you know, for different causes. And something as simple as wearing a shirt in a race that is devoted to, you know, the cancer research, whether it be running in memory of somebody. A lot of my friends run for military heroes. Any of these things, I mean, when you get out in these races, you're always around other people, right? So you're getting outside of the social media world. You're actually with people.
Yeah.
And, you know, I always run for Meg. You know, she's the young mom who was hit and killed by a drunk driver here in our community about 4 years ago, which led to my running journey to begin with. But I always have, you know, a Run for Meg shirt on. And a lot of people, when I'm out there on a race, and it benefits me to be slow, because I'm at a pace where I can talk, and you're usually with other slow people who are kind of like either taking a break or just slow, and it's more convenient to say, tell me about Meg. And you know, sometimes I love the new song. I think it's Josh Wilson, Dream Small. You know, a lot of times we think, and it's never lost on me. I do a podcast, and I, you know, interview wonderful people like you and share it out there. And I know
you just said, and you also just said doo-doo.
You're really fascinated on that. We're all the way back to the beginning. But, you know, I pressure myself sometimes and get caught up. And again, it's when we want to make it about us that we think this has to be big, right? I have to raise a lot of money. I have to run the Georgia Jewel race. I have to do all these big things. And again, I don't think God begrudges of that. I think he wants us to think big, but not at the expense of making him small, right? I think when we start thinking I have to do something big for him to do something big, that is so false. We have no idea what will happen when we're out there on that course, and maybe somebody's just having a hard time in their race, and you walk up and say, "Are you okay?"
Yep.
And you strike up a conversation. You never know, because I've read it many times. I read a lot of running blogs, and the number of times somebody has referenced somebody who came up on the course and impacted them in that race and gave them a different sense about people. And, for me, a lot of those conversations do lead to my love for God, my relationship with God. Now, again, for people listening who that may not be their deal, I'm a big believer, God don't need us to say his name to work through us, right? Just by being out there helping folks, being out there, being a loving spirit. Again, I will never put God in a box to say that he needs me to do certain things for him to use me. But he does need us to be out there with loving hearts, right? I mean, he gave us a couple of basic commands: love him, love other people. Well, that takes interaction. That takes some doing on our part. But it doesn't take a podcast. It doesn't take, being a great writer. It doesn't take being a race director. Sometimes it just takes being out there with other people. And that's why running is such a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think it was Francis of Assisi, the Francis guy. I think he said, share your faith always and use words when necessary.
Right.
And that's, there's so much of an impact and a difference that we can make by just loving people.
Right.
And loving in the running community can look really different. Like, leading up to a race, you got to train. Well, I can tell you, I really like running with people a lot more than running with myself sometimes. So inviting people into that training with you, and then catering to them. Okay, so, hey, you want to run together? Great. What's a great time for you? Early morning? I had some of my favorite conversations with my friends training early in the morning. At 5 o'clock in the morning, running. This is when we lived in Cincinnati. Running the streets of Cincinnati. There's something very peaceful and beautiful about working together. You're both training for a goal, or you have a goal, but things are quiet around you. And when you're running, and I know this is a funny, crazy thing, but you're a dude and you might understand this. When you're running, you don't have to make eye contact with someone. Yeah. So it's much easier to have vulnerable conversations, I have found, when you're running, because, Franklin and I actually have really great fights when we run, because we can't look at each other and we're too tired to really argue. So we really come to resolutions a lot faster when we're running together.
That is,
we're not.
That is fun. We don't have the energy to take this so we're much more interested in getting the fight over. We know it's going to end well, so we just expedite the process. I love it.
Yeah, but, inviting people into, we have these rhythms that we incorporate with running. And that's one of the great things about running, is there are tons of touch points that I think we have, and you have done a great job of leveraging all of these touch points and inviting people into it. And so, whether it's, I know for me as a mom, a lot of my miles right now in this season of life are on the treadmill. And the biggest thing that I'm missing out on are those moments of inviting people to run with me so that I can talk to them. But you do a great job of connecting with people personally, and it's, investing in those relationships then allows us to ultimately, I think it's Proverbs where it says, taste and see that the Lord is good, or maybe it's a Psalm. But that's what we're doing. We're giving people a taste of how good God has been to us in our lives, not in that he's made it perfect and wonderful, but like, in the end of the day, there is goodness and joy that we experience, and we want to share that with other people. So to do that, we have to be around other people. And I think, what I hear you say is leverage everything that you have to be loving and to be different. Wear a T-shirt, take that opportunity. If somebody's hurting, you may be hurting too, but, give them a high five and say, hey, you want to hurt together? Let's suffer together.
Right.
But being different like that gives us the chance to share, always giving an answer for for the faith that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I reference it all the time that, Jesus was sort of a ultra marathoner. He just was out there going from place to place to place, and always there was nobody he shied away from. In fact, it would be the folks who were probably living in the most darkness, who were struggling with the most difficulties, that he would always end up right next to them, next to a well, and they would be saying, "What are you doing here talking with me?" And his answer always was, one way or another, "Well, you need me here. You need this life that I have." And I always sort of draw that parallel when, we're out there running and you come across these people who may need something that you have, this hope, this life. And a lot of times you have them in a position where they might be asking, why are you interested in helping me, right? You've got this race to run. You've got your own deal going. Why me? And, I always have an answer for that. I think we have an answer for that. And I just think running sets up those opportunities for, I think anything really. I mean, running's my deal, but I think anything that, the answer in all of our conversations, this answer you gave just has resonated so much with me. It was in our last podcast, and I asked you about being a race director. What's the most meaningful part of being a race director? And there are a lot of answers you could have given to that. And you could have talked about seeing people reach personal goals. You could have talked about, as a race director, we want to maximize the number of people who come out, or you talk a lot about giving back, so you could have highlighted that. You said none of that first. Your answer was that getting to see people in these meaningful and vulnerable conversations, which floored me completely. I get that. I get how that happens, and it's certainly been a part of running with me. But for you as a race director who's had all these experiences, to focus in on that piece was very telling. And I think that's where it's in those conversations where God really does enter in. I've said over and over, the whole running journey has just taught me better how to pray better, how to have better conversations with God. And it isn't into talking to God. I've always been good at talking to God. God, hey, I need this. God, I'm struggling with this. Come take care of this for me. But running has given me that place and space. Again, your words at one time, and you get to places where you're just so vulnerable and empty. Like, okay, I just climbed this mountain. I got nothing left, right? So, God, I don't even have enough strength to talk to you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to listen. I'm just going to open up my ears. I know you got something to carry me through this, and probably something you want me to do in this moment with somebody around me. So I'm all ears, but I think I'm fully expecting on that vulnerability on the Georgia Jewel Trail for sure.
Well, okay, last few questions. Tell us about the family dynamics. And I got to go here, because if you're anything like me and Franklin, there is a crazy balance of being on mission, but also being on mission with the running and with the outreach, and being on mission as a spouse and a parent. Tell us how you're navigating that, and some things that are struggles in that, and some things that have been positives in balancing all that.
Ooh. Well, I mean, anybody who signing up for 35-mile races or marathons, or even half marathons, there is a huge time commitment to that. You can't go down to run the Georgia Jewel 35 miles without, like, tomorrow I'll be going over near Charlottesville to run 18 miles worth of hilly trails over there, and then a half marathon Sunday on some trails more locally. So, the time, I've got 9 and 11-year-old kids. You've got young kids. And I tell Dad, and I have to challenge myself not to be hypocritical in this. And in working with at-risk kids for 13 years, people ask me all the time, well, what was wrong with those kids, or what kind of trouble were they in? And I said, let me just fast forward to this. The one common denominator that I found in all of those kids, probably 1,000 over 13 years, is that 98, maybe 99% of them were living without a dad in their life. That was the common denominator, whether dad was, best case scenario, he was there or completely uninvolved. A lot of cases, these kids didn't know their dad. Dad was incarcerated. Whatever. Dad was not in their life. And any new dad I ever talked to, and, you know, they're reading books or they're trying to figure out, what do I need to do to be a good dad? I tell them, put the books away. The kids will let you know what they need. Trust me. They cry and cry until you figure it out. They are these wonderful little creatures. They will not let you not take care of them. But the piece that you'll never be able to fix is not being there. So just get your mindset. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there when they're crying. I'm going to be there when they're playing basketball. I'm going to be there when they've had a hard day at school. And, you know, we all get jobs where we get busy, and running can get us busy. If with kids, you've got this mindset that I'm going to be there, well, then you're going to force yourself to figure that piece out. And same with a marriage. So that requires time, right? And that's just at the simplest level. Right? There's a lot that has to happen within that time, but I think that's where people can lose it real quick is, and again, I'm slow, so for me to go out and run 18, 20 miles is like a day, right? So the whole day is just, and my wife knows that. Oh my God, if he's running a half marathon this morning, that means a half day on the couch afterwards, you know? So, but, you know, the beauty is I have this passion for running. She has a passion and career with photography. So there's a lot of give and take and a lot of compromise there. And we have this shared goal of being there for our kids. And when you have that shared piece, and I listened to a podcast you all did recently that talked about your move to Chattanooga, how you simplified things. Franklin cut down on hours of work. You decided to homeschool. A lot of that was just based on this shared idea that we're going to be here for our kids. Now, everybody will have different ideas what happens in that be here for them moment, but first and foremost, kids need to see us there. They need to feel us there. They need to know when things are tough, I'm there. And everybody will approach that differently. But again, I think the great risk with running especially, and long distance running, is to quickly let that whole time piece get out of balance. And I have to, because I also work 2 jobs. So it's easy to, it is real easy to see that piece get out of balance, which is why I force myself, and I don't mind confessing, force myself, because it takes some sacrifice sometimes to, when my boys are playing a sport, I coach it. I sign up, I'm coaching it. And sometimes it's not even a sport I'm very good at. But when I say that, I'm not only obligated to my kids, I'm obligated to other parents' kids. So it's a way of committing to it, and I can't. There's no way I can say, well, you know, there's a group going running tonight. I think I'll go run and do that.
Right.
And, you know, the other piece is my Katie and the boys this Sunday when I'm running the half marathon, they're all going over there and they're running the 5K. So I think they're getting more and more interest in, you know, the running end of things. I don't think any of them will ever be, you know, Georgia Jewelers, but you never know. There was a day, like I said, I was running on a back road in Ohio as a teenager saying, I'm going to kill somebody if he makes me run this far again. And here I am voluntarily signing up to run 3 times that far. But you know, everything, whatever, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that any time that, because, you know, marriage is huge. Family is so huge in our faith. It's so symbolic of this relationship with God. And so the devil knows that. Anything he can do
Yep.
to take a dad, I'm just speaking for me, from
Yes.
a dad's, anything he can do to get me out of my family life, that dude is celebrating, man. Because if you look around, it's my personal opinion, but it's an opinion based on 13 years of working with kids without a dad, coming from homes that are broken. If I personally were the devil, I would prioritize breaking up families. I would prioritize getting dads to quit spending time with their kids. Because if I can do that, I don't have to really focus on much else. As the devil, I'll be very successful in my mission of getting people relying on their self, getting themselves interested in other things other than an eternal life and a relationship with God. If I can get dads away, number one, that family will break down, which has its own implications. Right. And those two boys in Keith's life, Elliot and Ian, the likelihood is much, much greater that they will never grow to know and love God if I can get dad out of that picture. And so that's where running can become, we can use running as a tool to grow a relationship with God, but the devil's always ready to take our passions and our interests and turn them completely upside down on us. I think a lot of things we go into with this interest, and I say it from a faith perspective, we absolutely start to embrace these things with an interest to serve God. And, then there's a lot of people wake up 9 months later and say, holy cow, this thing is completely upside down on me. This is not what I set it out to be. And that didn't happen by accident.
Yep. No. Well, I mean, to your point, the family structure is really a powerful way that God continues his story. And I will tell people that there is nothing more important about running than your family. I don't care what race you have that you're training for. I don't care how close it is. I don't care how big of a deal it is. Nothing is worth hurting your family for. And, hurting your family has lots of different definitions. But one of the things that Franklin and I have had to navigate is just being truthful with each other. And so there are days where, and it is good, back to one of the things that you said, and who you surround yourself with, it can be helpful to surround yourself with truth tellers and people who will encourage you to truth versus discourage you from truth. And so, we've got a lot of great friends who will just be honest and say, hey, you know what, we're out of balance right now, and we just need to hunker down as a family. And so, the husband will say, I'm not going to be at the Saturday morning runs. I mean, we have a friend right now who the wife really just wants him to sleep in with the family on Saturday mornings, to have a nice, slow Saturday morning, because for years he's gotten up at, 4 a.m. to go run. And she was able to communicate, hey, this is a need that I have. And then he honored her and submitted to her and said, hey, I care enough about you and the dynamics of our family to I'll do that for a season. And, I've had to ask the same thing of Franklin, like, hey, can you come home after work instead of going and running? Because we have a lot going on, and I just really need some time with you. I need us to put the kids to bed and sit on the couch and play cards and just talk. And I think anytime we can get excited and passionate about something, and we do want to leverage it for God's kingdom, we cannot do it at the expense of our families. And so being honest, because, just like you were saying, from a male point of view, being taken away from the family is a thing for you. I think from a woman's standpoint, bitterness and resentfulness can set in for me. If I'm not careful to communicate to Franklin, hey, here are my needs in all of this. And so I know it is a tough balance, especially when you're throwing in an ultra. I know it's hard to navigate. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that. But my other two final questions are, what is the one thing that you're most excited about for the Jewel? And what is the one thing that you're losing sleep over about the Jewel?
Well, at the risk of sounding like I'm casting favor to the wonderful person I'm talking to right now. I absolutely look forward to meeting you in person. This has been a wonderful friendship that we've developed online and have had some just, I think, powerful conversations. And I don't for a minute think any of it's been accidental either, that, you know, a year ago, whenever it was, almost a year ago, that I came across you on Harvey Lewis's Facebook page, and really the thing that captured and why I reached out to you from the very beginning was this community you had built in Cincinnati at Crossroads Church with this whole running. And I thought, wow. And now getting to know you, it's very clear how and why all that happened. So I'm really excited about meeting Team Baker. I've listened to all of your guys. As a family, I love your honesty, right? I love you guys. Just the fact is, everything you just said, I've heard you say it on other podcasts, and it's always this recognition that, holy cow, you know, we fight and we do it best out on a trail. We have to tell each other that, you know, you're messing things up here. I really appreciate that. I signed up for the Georgia Jewel really just based solely on this idea that I really like this Jenny Baker. I love this enthusiasm. She's the race director of this thing. That sounds like a really cool idea. The only thing the challenging piece that captured me after you and I talked was 35 miles. I just thought that's longer than I've ever run. And I got intrigued and signed up for it really based solely on that. It's in the aftermath of signing up that this whole reality, okay, trails, and I knew it when I signed up, but I didn't realize that was such a different world.
Yeah.
And now that I run them, and, you know, I'm like, you know, you read books, technical trail, double path trail, like, what the heck is a technical? Well, now I know. I've written. They are very technical. The whole idea of elevation was foreign, which is now setting in. But with all that said, I'm excited about that challenge. I always I say it all the time. I like much more saying I finished that race much more than I do preparing for it. So this whole idea of crossing the finish line at Georgia Jewel is a very exciting proposition to me. Just it allows you for a minute to forget the 8, 10, 12 hours it's going to take to do it. You can just go right to, and then you do a great job of building that up with the family style reception and kind of like running into our living room. I'm ready to be in your living room saying that I did it. Now, the great fear is that I won't be in your living room saying I did it. You know, when you take on something, you take on something big. And when you go and look at the last year's race results and you see those big 3 letters all over the place, DNF, DNF, DNF. And when you look at them and see, hey, many of those folks were in my age group, appropriate doubt comes in. And and I don't want people to think doubt isn't necessarily this bad thing. It's just how do you respond to the doubt? And really the only thing I can do about it is go out and run these trails, do everything I can to prepare. And like Houston, because the physical piece of Houston is, I look back on it, there was nothing I could have done different. It wasn't because I didn't train. I did everything I could. I just wasn't up to it. I can live with that and then get remotivated to go back and redeem myself in that. So, there's a lot of unknowns that will come with the Georgia Jewel, the whole trail piece, the pooping piece, there's just a lot of this whole idea. I've read some people that took a wrong turn and got lost. Like, you don't run a marathon ever with any risk whatsoever of getting lost. Right. And then the other piece, going back to Houston now, since I've signed up and my friend Nicole signed up, there's 3 other young ladies from Richmond who heard your podcast and they're going. So, there's this added pressure of, holy cow, I kind of started this thing. What if I'm the one that doesn't finish and they do? And but those are those doubts, that come in. But they are the doubts that make accomplishing it all the more meaningful in the end, because they are doubts you have to overcome. You can't let them beat you. So I'm really looking forward to it. And, you know, to your credit, I've talked with some people. I told you, messaging back and forth with a mutual friend now, Gregory, who says nothing but good things about the race. I've read so many blog posts about folks who've run it for the first time or the third or fourth time, and everybody, to a person, talks about how wonderful the race is, how wonderful the community is, what you and Franklin and the kids and Team Baker bring to it. So that makes it really, and again, to me, it's all God weaving this whole idea that I would ever want to run an ultra, and then somehow I land at the Georgia Jewel to do it, with almost all thanks to you and who you are. It's no accident in my mind that I'm going to be down there in September, and because of that, I have no idea that all of these expectations I have for it, all of these outcomes that I predict for it, none of them will be a piece of what the ultimate outcome of it will be. God always weaves something completely, and that makes me excited. I mean, that's become so much a part of my story. I get excited about these races to see what God will do, because it's never what I plan to do. I always look back and say, holy cow, I did not see that coming. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. Well, it's neat to see God working in your life like that, because everything you're saying, that you're feeling and thinking and experiencing about coming to the Jewel is the exact same thing I feel and think and experience when I plan the Jewel every year. I mean, it's funny. I have, this women's adventure camp that I'm also doing that's coming up in the next couple weeks. And I find myself just literally praying, Lord, you know what I got to pray. You better show up. You have called me to this thing. So you've called me to this big thing. I'm risking big, so you better show up big. And, I hear you saying kind of the same thing. And isn't that interesting that the Lord develops our faith muscles by calling us? I mean, it's that, whole, as cliche as it is, calling us out of the boat and to walk on the water. And to your point, I mean, you and I have, I think, have been walking with God long enough to where we can look back. And it's like writing. I tell a lot of people, and I would love for you to do this. I tell a lot of people, read the book of Hebrews, and there is the Hall of Faith. That's kind of what they call it. The whole chapter where it says, by faith, Abraham left his family. By faith, Moses, did this. And it's just this whole account of by faith, these people did this, and this is what God did. Yeah. And so I think you and I both have a rich chapter of our own of, by faith, Keith decided to start running again. By faith, Keith signed up for. By faith, Keith kept going. And the same for me. And so when we can go back and anchor ourselves to those times where we've said yes to God, and then he's delivered on, because he can't be something different than he is who he is, and he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so we have a chance to say, okay, God, I am nervous, not in a bad way, not in a fearful way, but I am nervous and anxious, and I trust, because you've done it for me in the past, that you're going to do it for me again in the future. And I'm excited to see for both of us how God brings himself honor and glory as we continue to walk down this road in the running community. So I'm thankful that you have been so bold in your faith, and you've been willing to invite people into your story. All you're doing is you're opening up your story, and you're saying, hey, if you want to come be a part of it, I want to share it with you. I want to care for you. I want to know you. And that is that's Jesus in you. And it's really been a blessing to me. And I know you guys will be a blessing to the other runners of the Georgia Jewel. So I'm excited for the other runners to get to know y'all so that they get another taste of just this goodness and this good life. So I'm very excited. Thank you for letting me ask you questions today.
Well, like I said, I wouldn't let just anybody do that. I knew where you'd come from, and I knew you you wouldn't let me get off easy. So when you know that, you just get right to just giving the answer. You're not going to accept some generic response. So you might as well just get right to the truth and the heart, because Jenny's going to find it anyway. But I am, I think this is been very planned. I think God has weaved this story together, and it's very, very cool. Like I said, I can already look back and see what he's done, but I'm most excited to watch him unfold what he's about to do.
Yeah, me too. So, okay, you can edit this part out if you want, but can I just pray for you and for us?
Oh, please.
Here, kind of at the end?
Absolutely.
Hey, God, good morning. Thank you for waking us up today. Thank you for your new mercies that come every morning when the sun comes up. God, you are a good Father, and I'm so thankful, Lord, that you define your goodness and I don't define your goodness. Thank you for being consistent and faithful. And, Lord, thank you for creating us, loving us, and giving us purpose. Lord, thank you for uniquely calling Keith to trust you, and in doing so, share what you've done in his life with other people. Lord, thank you for giving him these platforms where he can share you and your truth and your love with other people. Lord, I just bless the things that he's doing in your name, and I ask, Lord, that you would continue to give him more influence and opportunity as he continues this road with you. And Lord, I pray for physical health. Father, I pray that you continue to sustain him physically. Lord, give him good rest that is rejuvenating and restorative, Lord, so that each morning he wakes up and he has physically what he needs to keep listening to you and being obedient to you. And Lord, I pray for his marriage. I pray that there are sweet moments in the next few months as he's training, Lord. I just pray that there are sweet connection moments where he can trust that a few extra miles won't matter as much as a few extra minutes with his family and with his wife. And I pray for his work, Lord. I pray that there is just a calm and a peace to the work that you've provided for him to provide for his family through. Lord, I pray that he is able to find peace in the midst of the chaos of taking on a new endeavor for you. And Lord, I pray that you bless that faith and that risk. And Father, I pray for the Georgia Jewel. Lord, I pray that you start preparing the hearts of the runners now to have an experience, Lord, that is, I pray, different than any other experience they've ever had. Lord, I pray from the communication that they get in the emails all the way, Lord, to the conversations that they have pre-race and during the race. Lord, I pray that you post Keith and all of his friends and all of your people, Lord, just in the right place at the right time throughout the race, just to encourage the rest of the runners, Lord. I pray that whether they cross the finish line or they're sitting at the finish line talking about how terrible the race was, Lord, I pray that the conversation is truly supernatural, where, God, there is just a sense of joy about the entire weekend that people can't explain. And Father, I pray that they would ask questions, that they would create relationships with those of us who are your friends, where they could ask questions of, hey, why are you different? And Father, I pray that you would give us wisdom to know the answer to give them, that you would always give us the right words, and that you would always give us the courage to share an answer for why we live the way that we do. And God, thank you so much for entrusting us with your people and your kingdom, and for not giving up on us, God, even when we make really bad choices, Lord. The fact that you continue to stick with us and love us in spite of all that, Father, is so humbling. And so it is with that humble gratitude that we say thank you. And in Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Oh, amen. Thank you so much for that. No, I will not be editing that out. That needs to stay in there and be a part of this, because I will need to probably go back on that prayer more often than any as I tackle these next couple of months. But I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully you and I will talk again here in a month or so as we get closer. I'll be back on the interviewer part, and you can answer some questions. Jenny, I love this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith.
Well, one thing's for sure, when Jenny Baker comes on this show, she does not disappoint. So another great conversation with Jenny Baker. I absolutely look forward to heading down there for the Georgia Jewel and meeting her in person. I'll actually get to do that sooner than the Georgia Jewel. I am headed down there August 18th. They have actually a warm-up run to give rookies like myself a little taste of what they've got themselves into. I guess maybe gives you a month to decide whether you want to back out or not. So I will be headed down there in August and experiencing an 18-mile warm-up run. I just can't fathom doing that 18 miles and then having to spend the next month trying to figure out, now how on earth am I going to get another 17 in? Because I promise you that's exactly what I will be thinking. But hey, I'm a glutton for punishment. I like to set myself up for big challenges. So I'm going down and taste it and then come home and figure the rest of it out and probably be more committed to training, hopefully. But anyhow, I thank you all for listening to my conversation with Jenny today, and I hope you'll come back next time and listen in. So this week, get out there and run if you're a runner. If not, get out there and cheer somebody on. And if you're neither, if you just have no interest in running, keep coming back here. I'm glad you were here today because folks like Jenny Baker, their lives run much deeper than running. Their lessons that can inspire us go much deeper in our lives than things we can do like running, but more speaks to the people that we can be, the kind of people this world needs. So I'm really grateful that Jenny joined us today. You all have a great week.
Despite